The dust never settled in Ash Hollow. It hung in the air like the town's secrets, thick and suffocating under the merciless Nevada sun. On this particular Tuesday morning in 1887, the weekly market buzzed with its usual energy. Farmers hawking their produce, children weaving between wooden stalls, and the constant chatter of gossip that fueled this remote frontier settlement. Martha Henderson was arranging her prized apples when she heard the crash. Her wooden crate tumbled to the ground, red, fruit scattering across the dirt like drops of blood. Standing frozen beside the wreckage was a boy, maybe 12 years old, with hollow cheeks and clothes that had seen better decades. His dark eyes darted frantically as if calculating escape routes. "Thief!" Martha's shrill voice cut through the morning air. "He stole my apple, destroyed my stand." The accusation spread faster than wildfire. Within minutes, a crowd had formed, their faces twisted with the righteous anger that small towns wore, like badges of honor. The boy backed against a wooden post, trembling but defiant. "I didn't steal nothing," he whispered, but his voice was lost in the growing roar of accusations. Sheriff Coleman pushed through the crowd, his badge catching the sunlight. A man in his 50s, with graying temples and tired eyes, he'd seen enough frontier justice to know how these situations ended. "What's the commotion here?" "Caught him red-handed, Sheriff," declared Tom Bradley, the blacksmith. "Boy's been lurking around town for days. Probably stolen half our goods by now." The sheriff studied the trembling child. No family had claimed him. No one knew his name or origin. In Ash Hollow, strangers were guilty until proven innocent, and sometimes not even then. "Please, mister," the boy pleaded, looking directly at Coleman. "I was just hungry. The apple fell and I—" "Save your lies for the judge, boy," Coleman interrupted, reaching for his rope. "We'll hold you until the circuit judge arrives next month." A month in their makeshift jail meant a death sentence for a child. Everyone knew it, but no one cared to acknowledge it. The crowd murmured approval as Coleman approached the boy. That's when the stranger appeared. He materialized from the crowd like a shadow gaining substance. Tall and weathered, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines carved deep by sun and sorrow. His clothes were simple but well-maintained, and his pale blue eyes held the weight of someone who'd seen too much of the world's cruelty. "Hold on there, Sheriff." The voice was quiet, but carried an authority that made everyone pause. This was the man they called Cowboy, though no one knew his real name. He lived alone in a cabin 5 miles outside town, appeared occasionally for supplies, and spoke to no one unless absolutely necessary. Some said he was a former lawman. Others whispered he was running from something. All agreed he was best left alone. "This ain't your concern, Cowboy," Sheriff Coleman said, though his hand moved away from his rope. "Maybe not," Cowboy replied, stepping closer to the boy. "But I didn't see any theft. Saw a hungry child in a fallen crate. Could have been an accident." Martha Henderson's face flushed red. "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm calling for fairness." Cowboy's gaze swept the crowd. "Any of you actually see this boy steal anything? Or are we condemning a child based on assumptions?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. In truth, no one had witnessed the actual moment of the supposed theft. They'd simply seen the aftermath and drawn their conclusions. "He's a vagrant," Tom Bradley protested. "Been sleeping in our alleys, probably stealing food for days." "Being homeless isn't a crime," Cowboy said. "And last I checked, we don't hang children for being hungry." And the crowd shifted uneasily. They'd come expecting swift justice and found themselves facing uncomfortable questions about their own humanity. Sheriff Coleman cleared his throat. "Look, cowboy, I appreciate your concern, but the law is the law. The boy needs to be held accountable. Then I'll take responsibility for him." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Every face in the crowd registered shock. Cowboy, the hermit who avoided human contact, was volunteering to take custody of a suspected thief. "You can't be serious," Coleman stammered. "Dead serious. The boy comes with me. I'll vouch for his character and ensure he causes no trouble. If anything goes missing in town, you can hold me accountable." Martha Henderson stepped forward, her voice dripping with suspicion. "Why would you do such a thing? What's your interest in this?" "Criminal." Cowboy looked down at the boy, who stared back with a mixture of hope and terror. For a moment, something flickered in the man's eyes. A memory, perhaps, or a recognition of something familiar in the child's desperate situation. "Everyone deserves a chance," he said simply, "especially children." The crowd erupted in angry murmurs. This wasn't how these situations were supposed to unfold. They wanted justice, not mercy. They wanted punishment, not redemption. "This is highly irregular," Sheriff Coleman protested, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Technically, Cowboy wasn't breaking any laws by offering to take responsibility for the boy. Irregular, maybe, but not illegal. Cowboy extended his hand to the child. "What's your name, son?" The boy hesitated, glancing between the hostile crowd and this unexpected savior. "Billy," he whispered, "Billy Morrison." "Well, Billy Morrison, how would you like to come work on my ranch? Honest work, for honest pay, and 3 meals a day." Billy's eyes widened. After weeks of scrounging for scraps and sleeping in doorways, the offer sounded too good to be true. But something in Cowboy's weathered face suggested sincerity. You'd really do that? For me? I would." Sheriff Coleman threw up his hands in frustration. "Fine. But if anything goes wrong, it's on your head, Cowboy, and don't expect the town to forget this." As Cowboy led Billy away from the crowd, the whispers began immediately. Why would a loner risk his reputation for a vagrant child? What was he hiding? What did he really want with the boy? Martha Henderson watched them disappear down the dusty street, her lips pursed in disapproval. "Mark my words," she announced to anyone who would listen. "No good will come of this. That man's got ulterior motives, and we'll all regret not stopping this madness." But as the crowd dispersed, returning to their daily routines, none of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows near the general store. A well-dressed man with calculating eyes and a thin smile who seemed very interested in the morning's events. The real story of Billy Morrison was about to begin, and it would shake Ash Hollow to its very foundations. Because sometimes the most innocent-looking situations hide the darkest secrets, and sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the most unexpected places. As Cowboy and Billy walked toward the edge of town, neither aware of the watching eyes or the storm they'd just unleashed, the first chapter of their story closed. But the mystery was just beginning, and the truth would prove more shocking than anyone in Ash Hollow could possibly imagine. The 5-mile ride to Cowboy's ranch passed in tense silence. Billy sat behind him on the old mare, clutching the man's worn leather jacket as they navigated the rocky trail that led away from Ash Hollow. The boy's stomach growled audibly, a sound that seemed to echo across the vast Nevada landscape. Cowboy's ranch was modest but well maintained, a small log cabin, a barn that had seen better days, and a corral that housed 3 horses and a handful of cattle. It wasn't much, but to Billy, who'd been sleeping in alleys for weeks, it looked like paradise. "First things first," Cowboy said, dismounting and helping Billy down. "You're going to get cleaned up and fed. Then we'll talk." The cabin's interior was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by simple wooden furniture that Cowboy had clearly made himself. Billy's eyes immediately fixed on the kitchen area, where the scent of yesterday's stew still lingered. "Sit," Cowboy instructed, pointing to a chair at the small wooden table. He ladled stew into a bowl and set it before the boy, along with a chunk of fresh bread. "Eat slow. Your stomach's probably not used to real food." Billy needed no further encouragement. He attacked the meal with the desperation of someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be full. Cowboy watched silently, his expression unreadable. "When's the last time you had a proper meal?" Cowboy asked. Billy paused, a spoonful halfway to his mouth. "Maybe 2 weeks? There was a lady in Carson City who gave me some bread. Carson City's 60 miles from here. You walked all that way?" The boy nodded, not meeting Cowboy's eyes. "Had to keep moving. People don't like my kind." "Your kind." Billy's hand instinctively moved to his collar, pulling it higher to hide something, but not before Cowboy caught a glimpse of what looked like a scar, or perhaps a birthmark, on the boy's neck. "Orphans," Billy said quickly. "People don't trust orphans." Cowboy studied the boy's face, noting the intelligence in his dark eyes and the careful way he chose his words. This child was hiding something, but then again, so was everyone in this part of the country. "Well, you're not just an orphan anymore," Cowboy said. "You're my ranch hand. That means you work for your keep. You follow my rules and you tell me the truth. Can you handle that?" Billy nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. I'm a hard worker, I promise. I won't cause you no trouble." "Any trouble," Cowboy corrected gently, "and I believe you. But Billy, if you're running from something, I need to know. I can't help you if I don't know what we're dealing with." The boy's face closed off immediately. "I ain't running from nothing, just looking for work and a place to belong." Cowboy recognized the lie, but didn't press. Trust would come with time, if it came at all. "Fair enough, for now. But secrets have a way of catching up with people out here. Remember that." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Coleman rode up to the cabin just as Cowboy was teaching Billy how to properly mend a fence. The lawman's expression was troubled. "Morning, Cowboy, Billy." Coleman tipped his hat but remained mounted. "Mind if I have a word?" "Speak your piece," Cowboy replied, not stopping his work. "Had some visitors in town yesterday evening. Men asking questions about the boy." Billy's hammer slipped, nearly catching his thumb. Cowboy noticed the boy's sudden pallor but kept his own expression neutral. "What kind of men?" Cowboy asked. "Professional types. Well-dressed, well-armed. Said they were looking for a runaway. Described Billy here pretty accurately." "Did they now?" Cowboy straightened, his hand casually moving closer to the gun on his hip. "They mention what this runaway supposedly did?" Coleman shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Said he stole something valuable from his employer back east. Documents or some such. They had papers, looked official. Billy had gone completely white. The hammer trembled in his small hands. "Funny thing about papers," Cowboy said conversationally. "Easy enough to forge if you know the right people. These men leave names. Called themselves Garrett and Mills. Said they worked for a Mr. Thornton in Philadelphia. Big industrialist, apparently." At the mention of Thornton's name, Billy dropped the hammer entirely. It hit the ground with a metallic clang that seemed to echo across the ranch. "You all right there, son?" Coleman asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I'm fine," Billy whispered, but his voice cracked on the words. Cowboy placed a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "Sheriff, did these men happen to mention what they planned to do when they found this supposed runaway?" "Take him back east for trial." Said the boy's employer was willing to be lenient if the stolen property was returned. "How generous," Cowboy said dryly. "And if the property wasn't returned?" Coleman's silence was answer enough. "I see. Well, Sheriff, I appreciate you riding out to warn us. But as you can see, Billy here is just a ranch hand trying to make an honest living. If these eastern gentlemen want to continue their search, they're welcome to look elsewhere." "Cowboy," Coleman's voice carried a warning. "These aren't local toughs. They've got money and connections. If they want the boy, they'll find a way to get him. Let them try." The quiet menace in Cowboy's voice made even the sheriff take notice. This wasn't the hermit who avoided confrontation. This was someone else entirely, someone dangerous. After Coleman left, Billy finally broke down. The tears came in great shuddering sobs as the boy collapsed onto a hay bale. "They found me," he whispered. "I thought I was far enough away, but they found me." Cowboy knelt beside him, his voice gentle. "Billy, I need you to tell me the truth now. All of it. I can't protect you if I don't know what we're up against." Through his tears, Billy began to speak. The story that emerged was far different from what anyone in Ash Hollow could have imagined. "My real name is William Thornton Morrison," he began. "Thornton, he's my stepfather. My mama married him when I was 8, after my real daddy died." Cowboy's expression darkened. "Go on." "At first he seemed nice enough, but after the wedding, everything changed. He hurt my mama, beat her when he thought no one was looking. And when she got sick and died last year, he started in on me." The boy's voice grew stronger as he continued, as if sharing the burden was giving him courage. "But that wasn't the worst part. I found out what he really does for a living. He owns factories back east, but he uses children to work them. Kids younger than me, working 16 hours a day for nothing but scraps. When they get sick or hurt, he just throws them out. And you have proof of this." Billy nodded, reaching into his shirt and pulling out a small wrapped bundle. "Letters, contracts, records of payments to men who bring him runaways and orphans. I took them before I ran." Cowboy examined the documents. Even in the fading light, he could see they were genuine and damning. This wasn't just about child labor, it was about human trafficking on a massive scale. "Billy, do you understand what you have here? Evidence that could put him in prison for life," the boy said quietly. "That's why he sent Garrett and Mills. They're not just bounty hunters, they're killers. He can't let me live, not with what I know." As the sun set over the Nevada mountains, Cowboy made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He looked at this brave, frightened child who'd risked everything to expose a monster, and he saw something he'd thought was lost forever: hope. "Well then," Cowboy said, standing and checking his rifle, "I guess we'd better make sure those documents get to the right people. But first, we need to keep you alive long enough to testify." Billy looked up at him with something approaching worship. "You believe me? I believe you. And more than that, I'm going to help you finish what you started." As night fell over Ash Hollow, neither Cowboy nor Billy knew that their conversation had been overheard. In the shadows beyond the ranch, two figures melted back into the darkness, their mission clear. The hunters had found their prey. Now the real game would begin. The attack came at dawn. Cowboy's years of living on the edge had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. The subtle wrongness in the morning air, the absence of birdsong, the nervous whickering of the horses woke him instantly. He rolled from his bed, grabbing his rifle in one fluid motion. "Billy," he whispered urgently, shaking the boy awake. "Get dressed. Quickly." The child's eyes snapped open, immediately alert. 3 weeks of living in fear had taught him to wake ready for flight. "Are they here?" Billy whispered. "Someone is." Through the cabin's single window, Cowboy could see two figures moving stealthily toward the barn. Professional killers, just as Billy had described. They moved with the careful precision of men who'd done this before. "Back door," Cowboy instructed. "Stay low, head for the rocks behind the corral. If shooting starts, you run for town and find Sheriff Coleman." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Cowboy had no intention of running. These men had come to kill a child, and that was something he couldn't allow. Billy clutched the wrapped documents to his chest. "The papers, keep them safe. They're the only thing that can end this." The first shot shattered the morning silence, splintering the cabin door. Cowboy pushed Billy toward the back exit as more gunfire erupted, the professional killers abandoning stealth for overwhelming force. "Go!" Cowboy shouted, returning fire through the window. Billy hesitated for one agonizing moment, then disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. The gunfight that followed was brief, but intense. Garrett and Mills were skilled, but Cowboy had the advantage of knowing his own land. He used the cabin's layout and the surrounding terrain to his advantage, forcing the killers to expose themselves. When the shooting stopped, one man lay dead beside the barn, and the other had fled into the desert, nursing a wounded arm. But Cowboy's victory was short-lived. As he emerged from the cabin, he found Sheriff Coleman and a posse of townspeople surrounding the ranch. Their faces were grim, and their weapons were drawn. "Drop your gun, Cowboy," Coleman ordered. "Sheriff, what's this about?" "Those men attacked my property." "Those men were federal marshals," Coleman interrupted. "They had warrants for the boy's arrest. You just killed a federal officer." Cowboy's blood ran cold. The documents in his pocket, the ones Billy had shown him, suddenly felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. "That's impossible. They were hired killers sent by a respected businessman to retrieve stolen property and a runaway." "Ward," Coleman finished. "I've got the paperwork right here, official federal warrants." Cowboy looked at the faces surrounding him and saw no sympathy, only the cold satisfaction of people who'd been proven right. They'd always suspected he was trouble, and now they had their proof. "Where's the boy?" Coleman demanded. "Safe," Cowboy replied, "and he's going to stay that way." "The hell he is. You're under arrest for murder, and when we find Billy, He's going back east to face justice. As they shackled Cowboy's hands behind his back, he caught sight of a familiar figure standing at the edge of the crowd. A well-dressed man with calculating eyes and a thin smile. The same man who'd been watching from the shadows during the market incident. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. This wasn't about federal warrants or stolen property. This was about silencing a witness before he could expose the truth. "Sheriff," Cowboy said as they loaded him into the wagon, "you're making a mistake. That boy has evidence of crimes that go far beyond petty theft." "Save it for the judge," Coleman replied. "If you're lucky, they might not hang you." As the wagon rolled toward town, Cowboy's mind raced. Billy was still free, still had the documents, but for how long? Without protection, the boy wouldn't last a day against men like Thornton's agents. The Ash Hollow jail was little more than a reinforced shed behind the sheriff's office. As they locked him inside, Cowboy could hear the townspeople gathering outside, their voices rising in angry discussion. "Should have known better than to trust a drifter," someone said. "Always said there was something off about him," added another voice. "Poor boy, probably terrified out of his mind." Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, and the heat in the small cell became oppressive. Cowboy was beginning to think his situation was hopeless when he heard a familiar voice outside. "Sheriff Coleman, I need to speak with you." It was Martha Henderson, the woman whose apple stand had started this entire chain of events. "What is it, Martha?" "It's about that boy, Billy. I think I made a terrible mistake." Cowboy pressed his ear to the wall, straining to hear every word. "What kind of mistake?" Coleman asked. I lied about seeing him steal the apple. The truth is, I knocked over my own stand when I saw him looking at the fruit. He was so thin, so hungry-looking. I felt guilty, so I blamed him instead." There was a long silence. "Martha, are you saying the boy was innocent?" "Completely innocent. And there's more. That well-dressed stranger who's been asking questions around town. He offered me $50 to stick to my story about the theft. Said it was important that the boy be seen as a criminal." Cowboy's heart began to race. Finally, someone was telling the truth. "Why are you coming forward now?" Coleman asked. "Because I heard what happened at the ranch this morning. If that boy dies because of my lie, I'll never forgive myself." More voices joined the conversation as words spread through the small crowd. Other townspeople began admitting they'd seen the well-dressed stranger asking questions, offering money for information about Billy. "Sheriff," came another voice. "Tom Bradley, the blacksmith. I think we need to reconsider what really happened here." But before Coleman could respond, a new voice cut through the discussion, cold, authoritative, and utterly without mercy. "I'm afraid that won't be possible." Cowboy recognized the voice immediately. It belonged to the man he'd seen watching from the shadows, one of Thornton's agents. "Who are you?" Coleman demanded. "Agent Harrison, Federal Service. I'm here to transport the prisoner and recover the stolen documents." "Now wait just a minute," Martha Henderson protested. "We were just discussing some irregularities in this case." "There are no irregularities, madam. Only a criminal who murdered a federal officer and the people who helped him." The menace in Harrison's voice was unmistakable. Cowboy realized with growing horror that the agent wasn't just here for him and Billy. He was here to eliminate anyone who might cause problems. Sheriff Coleman, Harrison continued, I'll need you to turn over the prisoner immediately. As for the rest of you, I suggest you forget whatever stories you think you heard. Federal business has a way of making people disappear. Through the thin walls, Cowboy could hear the crowd's nervous murmuring. These were simple frontier people, not equipped to deal with threats from powerful Eastern interests. But then, cutting through the tension like a knife, came a young voice that made Cowboy's heart leap. That's not how it happened, and you know it. Billy Morrison stepped into view, the wrapped documents clutched in his hands. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, but his voice was steady. Billy, no, Cowboy whispered, but it was too late. My name is William Thornton Morrison, the boy announced to the stunned crowd. And I have proof that this man works for my stepfather, a man who traffics children and murders anyone who tries to stop him. The revelation hit the crowd like a thunderbolt. Harrison's hand moved toward his gun, but he was surrounded by too many witnesses to act openly. You're making a serious mistake, boy, Harrison said quietly. No, Billy replied, his voice growing stronger. The mistake was thinking you could silence the truth. As the boy began to unwrap the documents, Cowboy realized that everything was about to change. The truth was finally coming to light, but the most dangerous part of their journey was just beginning. Because men like Thornton didn't give up easily, and they had resources that went far beyond a single agent in a small Nevada town. The real battle for Billy's life and for justice was about to begin. The documents Billy revealed sent shockwaves through the gathered crowd. Letters detailing payments for acquired children, contracts with factory foremen for expendable workers, and most damning of all, correspondence between Thornton and various criminal organizations across the country. Sheriff Coleman examined the papers with growing horror. Sweet Jesus, he whispered. This is monstrous. Agent Harrison's facade finally cracked. Those documents are forgeries, he snarled, fabricated by a disturbed child seeking revenge against his loving stepfather. Then you won't mind if we send them to the territorial governor for authentication, Martha Henderson said boldly. The woman who'd started this crisis with a lie was now determined to see justice done. Harrison's hand moved toward his weapon, but Tom Bradley stepped forward, his blacksmith's hammer held ready. I wouldn't, if I were you, mister. You're outnumbered about 20-1. More townspeople gathered, their initial hostility toward Cowboy and Billy transforming into protective anger as they realized they'd been manipulated. These were people who understood hard work and honest living, and the idea of children being sold into slavery struck at their core values. Billy, Sheriff Coleman called out, I need you to tell us everything, from the beginning. The boy's voice was steady now, strengthened by the support he saw in the faces around him. My stepfather, Marcus Thornton, owns factories in Philadelphia, New York, and Boston, but he doesn't hire adult workers. He buys children from orphanages, kidnappers, and corrupt officials. As Billy spoke, more details emerged. Children as young as 6, working 16-hour days in dangerous conditions. Those who became sick or injured were simply discarded. Those who tried to escape were beaten or worse. I started collecting evidence after my mother died, Billy continued. She'd tried to stop him, and I think that's why she really died. Not from sickness, but from poison. The crowd's anger was palpable now. Even in the rough frontier justice of the Old West, there were lines that couldn't be crossed, and harming children was the most sacred of those boundaries. "The night I ran away," Billy said, "I overheard Thornton planning to expand his operation west. He was going to start taking children from frontier towns, places where people might not be missed right away." Harrison made his move then, drawing his gun in a desperate attempt to silence the boy, but he'd underestimated the protective instincts of the townspeople. Tom Bradley's hammer caught him in the wrist, sending the weapon flying, while two other men tackled him to the ground. "Sheriff," Martha Henderson said urgently, "we need to get word to the territorial authorities immediately. And we need to protect this boy until proper federal marshals arrive. Real ones, not Thornton's hired killers." Coleman nodded, his face grim with determination. "Tom, take 3 men and ride to Carson City. Telegraph the territorial governor and the federal marshal's office. Tell them we have evidence of a major criminal conspiracy and need immediate assistance." As the blacksmith and his volunteers prepared to ride out, Coleman turned to the jail, where Cowboy was still being held. "I owe you an apology," the sheriff said as he unlocked the cell door, "and probably my job. I should have listened instead of jumping to conclusions." Cowboy emerged, rubbing his wrists where the shackles had chafed. "You were doing what you thought was right, Sheriff. Can't fault a man for that. Still, I nearly got that boy killed because I was too quick to believe official-looking papers." Billy ran to Cowboy, throwing his arms around the man who'd risked everything to protect him. "I thought they were going to kill you," the boy whispered. "Takes more than a couple of hired guns to put me down, son," Cowboy replied, though his voice was gentle. "You did good, Billy. Took real courage to come forward like that." The next few days brought a whirlwind of activity to Ash Hollow. Federal marshals arrived from Carson City, followed by territorial officials and even a representative from the governor's office. Harrison was taken into custody, and under interrogation, he revealed the full scope of Thornton's operation. The evidence Billy had gathered proved to be just the tip of the iceberg. Thornton's network extended across multiple states, involving corrupt officials, criminal organizations, and even some legitimate businesses that turned a blind eye to his methods in exchange for cheap labor. "The boy's testimony will be crucial," Marshal Davies explained to Cowboy and Sheriff Coleman, "but it's going to be dangerous. Thornton has resources and connections we're still uncovering." "What kind of protection can you offer?" Cowboy asked. "We can put him in protective custody until the trial, but after that," Davies shrugged. "Men like Thornton have long memories and longer reach." That evening, as the officials made their plans, Cowboy sat with Billy on the porch of the sheriff's office, watching the sun set over the Nevada mountains. "What happens now?" Billy asked. "Now you get to be a hero," Cowboy replied. "Your courage is going to save a lot of children. But what about after? Where will I go?" Cowboy was quiet for a long moment. "Billy, I've been thinking about that. My ranch could use a permanent hand, someone to help with the cattle, maintain the buildings, maybe even help me expand the operation." Billy's eyes widened. "You mean you want me to stay? For real? If you'll have me as a guardian. I know I'm not much, just an old cowboy with more past than future. But I promise you'll always have a home, and you'll never have to be afraid again." The boy's answer was to throw his arms around Cowboy once more, tears streaming down his face. But these were tears of joy, not fear. 3 months later, the trial of Marcus Thornton made headlines across the country. Billy's testimony, supported by the documents he'd risked his life to preserve, led to convictions not just of Thornton, but of dozens of his associates. The child labor ring was dismantled, and hundreds of children were freed from conditions that amounted to slavery. Thornton himself received a life sentence, and his vast fortune was liquidated to provide compensation to his victims and fund new child protection services. Billy Morrison, now legally Billy Morrison Hartwell, having taken Cowboy's real surname, became something of a celebrity. Newspapers called him the boy who brought down an empire, and he received letters from children across the country thanking him for his courage. But the fame didn't change him. He remained on the ranch with Cowboy, helping to build it into one of the most successful operations in Nevada. The two of them became a family in the truest sense, bound not by blood, but by shared experience and mutual respect. Martha Henderson, racked with guilt over her initial lie, became one of Billy's strongest supporters. She used her influence in town to ensure that the boy was welcomed and protected, and she never tired of telling anyone who would listen about his courage. Sheriff Coleman, humbled by his mistakes, became a more thoughtful lawman. He instituted new procedures to verify the authenticity of federal documents and always insisted on hearing all sides of a story before making arrests. As for Ash Hollow itself, the town was forever changed by the events of that summer. They'd learned that justice wasn't always simple, that appearances could be deceiving, and that sometimes the most unlikely people could be heroes. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the sun was setting over the mountains, Cowboy and Billy would sit on their porch and talk about the future. The boy had dreams of becoming a lawyer, of using his experience to protect other children who couldn't protect themselves. "You know," Cowboy said one evening, "I never told you why I helped you that first day." Billy looked up from the book he was reading, a law text he'd ordered from back east. "I always wondered about that. You reminded me of someone, a boy I knew a long time ago who needed help but didn't get it." Cowboy's voice was soft with old pain. "I couldn't save him, but I could save you." "What happened to him?" "He grew up angry and alone, made some bad choices, hurt people who didn't deserve it. Took him years to find his way back to being human again." Billy studied Cowboy's weathered face, understanding dawning in his eyes. "That boy was you, wasn't it?" Cowboy nodded. "Sometimes the best thing that can happen to a man is getting a chance to do the right thing, even if it's years too late." As the stars appeared in the clear Nevada sky, both man and boy reflected on the journey that had brought them together. It had started with an accusation and a lie, but it had ended with truth and justice. And in a small ranch outside Ash Hollow, two souls who had been lost found their way home, not to a place but to each other. The story of the loner cowman and the thief boy had become legend in those parts, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful force in the world isn't violence or money or influence. It's the simple decision to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. And in the end, that decision had saved more than just one boy's life. It had saved them both. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.